Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this our live webinar entitled "What Action to Take from a Soil Report. Use it, don't file it," or if your filing system's anything like mine, you could probably substitute the word "file" for "bin," unfortunately. But we have over 115 participants registered for this evening's event, which shows a very healthy interest in what is now we're approximately halfway through our soil nutrient health scheme as a world-leading scheme. You'll all be familiar with it, and we're going to find out a little bit more this evening about how we can use that information which has been gathered through that world-leading scheme. There's a little bit of housekeeping I want to do to start with, which is just necessary. So just to remind you all that this evening's event is being recorded, and a link will be sent out after the event if for any reason you want to watch it again. We will have 3 speakers, and at the end of those 3 speakers, we will have a Q&A. The way to put your questions is through the Q&A button, not the chat button, but the Q&A button on an iPad or an iPhone. That's usually up on the top of the screen. Probably best to do that as we go through. If you have a question as you hear the speakers, put it into that Q&A box as we're listening to them. We will conduct. There will be a chance to complete a survey at the end of the evening, and that obviously helps us just to ensure that we run these events properly and improve them as we do going forward. And our expectation is that the session will last somewhere around about an hour. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the evening. He is Mark Tripney. Mark works for iSoils Limited and who is one of the key figures behind the highly successful Calcium Conference. Mark is an experienced agronomist and will provide helpful insights into the interpretation of your soil analysis results, as well as demonstrating a holistic approach to soil health and the key factors involved in achieving a healthy, more productive soil. So I will hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, John. Hello, everybody online as well, and thank you for inviting me along to speak to you. Right. Hopefully that's all come up on the screen okay, and we can get on with the presentation. So, what action to take from a soil report? As we say, use it, don't file it. It's a precious amount of information that you've invested in when you undertake soil sampling and analysis. Oh, unfortunately, my slides are not working. Oh, there we go. Soil condition is key to a profitable farm business. We need to grow things as farmers. There's causes for compacted soil, for soil that's not performing as it should. We know 4 of those listed at the top part in red. But how much attention do you pay to the soil mineral imbalance, the calcium and magnesium? When you look at the effects, all the effects below, cost, nutrient runoff, denitrification, higher fertilizer requirement, nitrous oxide emissions, shorter growing seasons, reduced soil life, reduced biological life. In the middle there, middle right, forage mineral imbalance causing cattle health problems. These potentially all come from compacted soils. So what are we doing about these soils? Are we just using bits of metal, bits of equipment shown here on screen, the aerator, the aerator and the grassland subsoil are great bits of kit, but are we really getting to the base of the problem? I do recommend these bits of machinery. They do work extremely well if used properly in the right conditions. But do we know what the ideal soil composition is? Are we making sure there is enough air in the soil? Is it 25% air, or is it 45% water and 5% air, as it seems to have been this season? Do we know what the organic matter is in the soil? Most grassland soils are 5% plus. Arable soils tend to be lower than 5% organic matter, but it's a key driver in fertility and the structure of soil. Too much is also a bad thing. Anything over 10–12% is not necessarily a good thing. It may be an indicator that soil is not operating as it should. But are you getting out there with a spade? Are you making sure you understand the structure of your soil? Do you know where the compaction starts? Do you know if the soil is compacted at all? Where's the subsoil start? You know, what type of soil have you got? One of my favorite strap lines regarding soil is the soil chemistry affects the physics, which determines the biology. So if you have no soil biology, does that mean that the physics is at fault? Or is it actually the chemistry? So if we get the chemistry right, and you look at the chemistry on your soil reports, you get that soil chemistry right, you get the calcium magnesium balances right, the soil starts to restructure, it flocculates, which once we get that airspace back in the soil, the biology begins to thrive again, and then you really begin to farm profitably. Calcium, very much an ignored nutrient over the last 5 decades. It's essential for cell wall construction, strengthens a plant's physical structure, protects against insects and diseases. The potential there, particularly in arable situation, to reduce the amount of fungicides used. So vitally important, the better, healthier plant, more production of pectins, more efficient interception of sunlight, more efficient use of nutrient. The calcium, again, I mentioned earlier, reduces soil compaction by flocculating the soil and improving the structure, therefore improves soil biology again. Also, as we know, adjusts and maintains soil pH. Magnesium, again, another very important nutrient, constituent of chlorophyll, which is essential for photosynthesis and the greenness of the plant, aids phosphate and nitrogen metabolism. In conjunction with calcium is key to the water and air balance of the soil, so therefore impacts on soil structure. If there's an excess of magnesium, it's sticky. But also, as we'll come to later, it might not just be an excess of magnesium, it could be a lack of calcium. Again, high levels can affect and limit potassium availability, and again, influences soil pH. In soil reports, I like to see the 4 major cations quoted: calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. Vital for me for information in how a soil's been structured. Calcium is the dominant cation. As we said, calcium-magnesium balance is crucial to soil health and structure. Excess potassium and sodium can destroy a soil structure, make it fracture, make it slump. So be very careful, particularly with slurries and manures when you're overloading soil. And don't forget, ammonium is also a competitive cation. And also the fact that for every kilo of nitrogen that you put down, you could need somewhere in the region of 1 to 3 kilos of calcium carbonate to re-neutralize the soil. And when we look at and quote soil-based saturation, calcium should be somewhere in the region of 65 to 70%, and magnesium 10 and 15%, depending on the soil CEC, the cation exchange capacity. This might be the whole concept of cation exchange capacity and base saturation might be something new to you, but it's a tool which you can manage your soil with and get a better understanding of how a soil should operate. Phosphorus is a problem in Northern Ireland. It's a problem in a lot of intensive livestock areas. But we still keep putting it on, but we ignore the soil pH. You can see from this graph there that the optimum pH for phosphorus availability is 6.5. At a pH of 6, you're potentially locking up 48% of your phosphorus. That's the phosphorus in the soil and also any that you apply. So why not lime? Why not get the soil balance? Why not get the pH up to 6.5 when you want a highly productive system? It makes no sense to me to be on the borderline of 6. So now we're looking at some soil samples from Northern Ireland. And when you read these, what do you look at? Do you go straight for the index? Is it the indexes you look at first? Be very careful about soil indexes because they're a range. And within that range, you could be one end or another. What I usually look at are things like the highlighted potassium. the extremely high levels, for example, on this grazing land, starts telling me a story, and that story straight away is that there's too much slurry and manures has gone onto this land, and it's a potentially toxic situation. That potassium in that instance is causing the pH to be higher than it should be. Sorry, is causing the pH to be lifted by the potassium, and it's not being altered by the calcium particularly much. Those calciums are probably low, but I don't have a cation exchange capacity figure to actually ascertain whether they are or not. So we look at the phosphorus, and we look at the middle line there, 22, which is a good supply of phosphorus. If we follow across the pH, it's at a pH of 6. So potentially a decent availability. But then if you look at line 21, the 21.5, a pH of 5.7, you might argue that you need some phosphorus there. But I would argue that all you need there is a bit of liming, and then you're going to make more phosphorus available. But also, what are you applying to this land all the time? Do you actually understand what's in your slurry? Are you like the sample on the left-hand side of the page, Marion Mauer, which is from a slatted system with 11.7% dry matter, or the Cheshire one, which is 4.1? If we highlight a couple of figures here, again, we look at the potassium, and we can see the potassium on the left is half of what the one is on the right at 386. So if you're applying to the 250 kilo of N recognized limit, you're over applying potassium significantly, particularly to grazing land, probably in both these scenarios. But then look at the bottom here. Calcium on the left-hand side is 335, and on the right is 120, 3 times more. That's the equivalent of calcium carbonate of somewhere in the region of 750 kilos on an annual basis. This farm had a particular problem in that all his pHs were 7. The bedding material that he was using was actually bedding material that had been treated with lime. So that was causing him another problem. You have to understand what your slurry is and use it in conjunction with your soil tests. And carrying on the theme on potassium, you'll notice here on the left-hand side, a balanced rumen and a balanced cow system where the potassium, sodium, and magnesium are all okay. And the saliva is rich in sodium. Whereas on the right-hand side, we're seeing forage with an imbalance of the ratio of over 20:1, which is very common. If you look at the slides that we highlighted earlier on with the excess potassium, this would be the situation that you would get on the right-hand side where the saliva is rich in potassium, and you're potentially going to turn cows over. They'll at very least have subclinical staggers if they don't have staggers at all. One way of balancing this is lump rock salt. Lump rock salt should be made available to all lactating animals. And when I see soil samples like we saw previously, I would be recommending lump rock salt. Cows self-medicate. It's a valuable tool in managing excess potassiums in silages. Another set of soil samples. The title is Enough Being Put Back? The answer is really no. You can see in these highlighted areas, the potassiums are all pretty low, particularly the one on the bottom line. This suggests that there's just not enough attention is being paid to what's happening. It could be that these have been cutting fields. But if you also notice on the right, the pHs are extremely low. So the phosphorus availability is poor. Again, does the farmer in this instance know exactly what's happening on his soils? He probably does. Well, he knows a little bit more now. But if you follow along the middle line, you'll notice that the calcium is a lot higher on that line than it is on any of the other 4, which suggests that the calcium is extremely low in all of those fields and probably should be somewhere in the region of 1850 for all of those samples if we knew the CEC. Coming on to cation exchange capacity, it's very nice to know the soil type, but if you look at the sandy clay loam, for example, you'll see the huge range of cation exchange capacity, 18 to 29, which means the calcium reading that you should be looking for that particular soil could be anywhere between 2,400 and 3,800. So you need to understand what your soil is, where your CEC is, what your calcium levels are, to be able to interpret the soil tests properly. Which leads us on to a more detailed soil test. I've titled this one High Mag. It's a comment I get all the time. Oh, I've got high mags, my soils are sticky. The problem is it's misinterpretation of the data in a lot of instances. We can see in this instance, the magnesium is 251, saying an index of 4. To put that into context, I've got clients who have got parts per million of magnesium of anywhere between 700 and 1,000. So that's not extremely high. It's maybe a little high. Because if we look in the base saturation at the bottom of the page, we can see that the magnesium is 14% and the calcium is at 53% roughly. So if you remember back to an earlier slide about cations, I quoted that I would like to see the calcium range at 65 to 70. So therefore, this instance here, this field needs treating with calcium. You might say, Mark, well, why are you recommending calcium? It's got a pH of 6.2. Well, I'm recommending calcium because I think this field will probably have a structural problem. And I think that that figure of 563 is probably somewhere in the region of 400 parts per million below where it should be for a well-balanced soil. So it is about balancing soil. It's about using calcium, and it's about using calcium as a tool to restructure soil, to flocculate soil. So maybe I'm reading soil tests slightly different to you, but I'm reading different things. And these things I know work from my own personal farm management and also the advice I give on a regular basis. Again, another one with a pH of 6.2. So what's the problem? pH is there or thereabouts. This is for an arable field. And if we look down at the bottom there, the base saturation again, we can see that the calcium is not far off. It wants to be a few points higher at 65, but magnesium is short. So these are two very different fields, even though the pH is identical in terms of the reading. Again, in this instance, the calcium could do with being a bit higher at 1850. The magnesium could do with being nearer 160, 170 to get a properly balanced field in terms of parts per million. So maybe this is a different way of reading soil tests, but it is a way of trying to understand and restructure, get the soil balanced, get the physics right, get the biology working. When you look at soil tests and when you look at forage mineral analysis, there's often bits about antagonism. And this is a very useful chart, Mulder's chart, to try and understand antagonism. You've got some very high phosphorus levels across Northern Ireland. And just picking phosphorus there in the corner, the left-hand side, you can see that it has an antagonism towards zinc and copper. So it's potentially making those nutrients more unavailable, and particularly where you've got excesses of slurry being applied. Potassium, again, has a problem with causing magnesium problems. Excess potassiums will cause magnesium problems. So understand what the limitation on your farm is, what the antagonism is, maybe what the deficiency is, because it might be a deficiency. It might be an excess that is causing you a problem. So when we come to soil management, to summarize, analyze the soils regularly using a broad spectrum suite, including cation exchange capacity. Analyze your slurry because it might be different from standard figures. Your bedding material might affect the nutrient balance within the slurry. Target slurries where they're required, not everywhere. Avoid grazing paddocks already well supplied. It's much better putting them on cutting fields where the takeoff is significant. Use forage, mineral and tissue analysis to understand how your nutrient applications are affecting soil and plant and animal health. Buy a spade and dig inspection pits to understand where the compaction starts on your farm. Aerate if appropriate, choosing the right machine. How deep is the compaction? Is it 150 mil? Is it 200 mil? So is it a grassland subsoiler or is it an aerator? This promoting oxygenation will give deeper root penetration and better drainage, helping build soil biology and resilience in the soil. And please be conscious of calcium and apply it regularly. It shouldn't be once in 5 years, just because the grant scheme so many years ago allowed that to happen. It needs to be applied regularly to maintain the soil pH where it needs to be. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. That very insightful look into analyzing the analysis of the soil results that we're all starting to receive. Leading on from that, our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Johnson, who is the training manager at CAFRE, and he will provide the latest on the soil nutrient health scheme. He will focus on ways in which CAFRE is helping farmers to make the best use of the information provided by the scheme, and will share more on the free online training available to every farmer. Stephen will also share information on future plans for the soil nutrient health scheme and its impact going forward. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, John. Hopefully everybody can see the slides, and thank you everybody for joining. As John said, this evening I'm going to give a very brief outline on the soil nutrient health scheme, and in particular on the training that we at CAFRE are offering through our online service. So the scheme, as John said, has been running, we're now into our 3rd year, so we're into Zone 3. And as you can see there, the Zone 1, Zone 2, most of those areas have been sampled now. We're in Zone 3, where registration just closed there at the beginning of the month. And then Zone 4 around County Antrim, and that will be next year. So the scheme was set up basically to look at the vast majority of the fields across Northern Ireland. And it was to do several things, but in terms of farm businesses, it was to provide every farm business with a baseline, or basically a snapshot of what your soils are holding in terms of chemicals at this present time. And then hopefully that information, and you've heard Mark there, how you can use that information then to basically manage your nutrient applications more efficiently. Make better use of your slurry where it's needed, or basically use the fertilizer and the type of fertilizer that's required. So in a way, you're not under or not over supplying nutrients. The scheme itself is funded by DAERA, and it's managed by AFBI. It's quite a collaboration, in all honesty. So you've AFBI who manages it. You have RPS, who will be the folks who've already been out and will be out in the future to collect the soil samples across your fields. Then they will ensure those samples make it to NRM, and they do the analysis, and we'll post you out the results. And then ourselves at CAFRE come in to provide the training and the learning around those results. And yes, you will get an envelope, and if you have a lot of fields, you will get a very big envelope with a lot of information in it. And I'm sure it could be quite daunting. And the whole idea of this evening is that you just don't file that envelope. You actually open it and use it and look at the results. And I'll show you some of the online training later, how that can help. But I would like to point out also that behind the government gateway, we have an online map viewer. So if you're not keen on leafing through all the stuff that comes in the envelope, you can go in there and you'll see a map of your farm, as hopefully you're seeing there now, a map with several fields on it. And the online viewer can be set up to look at the different chemicals and pHs, etc., on your farm. Makes it very easy to distinguish areas that are, in this case, say the green areas there require no lime, and that's because the pH is reasonably good. There's a couple of amber areas that require lime, and then there's also an area that's blacked out. And I will just highlight that. You will see down below that there's no recommendations along for that area, and that's basically because the farmer, when he was registering the field, put it in as B1, and that means it's a special area of conservation, and there's no recommendations given for those types of areas. And there's a whole list of environmental codes that you can use when you're applying, and it's always worthy to refer back to them when you're starting to look through your fields. But as well as the online map, there's also a runoff risk map, and it is remarkably good by all accounts in terms of how it relates to what's on the farm. And again, you can see these fields, and you can see the ones where there would be a high risk of runoff, and the ones that are a lower risk. So, you know, if it's good dry weather and you're putting out slurry, it's a good idea to prioritize those fields where there would be a higher risk of runoff. And if the conditions are a bit chancier, there's better fields then to possibly put your slurry on. So that's a useful map as well to look up. And it should pretty much, or the feedback we're getting is it pretty much mirrors what you see on the ground. So in terms of CAFRE and the support, look, folks, we have online training for all your farm businesses. You can access this at any time. It's designed to be available 24/7. So if it's coming into the darker evenings and you're bored, you can go on, do a couple of, well, I was going to say a couple of hours, but probably an hour would be any amount. Or if you're waking up early in the morning or can't sleep, you can go on and access the training at any time. It's easy to follow, and I'll show you an example shortly. You can access it from the comfort of your own home, so it's a bit like tonight. You're in a webinar and you're sitting hopefully in your comfy chair as such. This can be the same. You can access it through a tablet or through your desktop. And look, the main thing is you can do this at a time and a pace that suits you. There's no point of coming out some night and you're not in great form and having to sit and listen through something and try to take it in. You can go in here and do 20 minutes or whatever and then pull out of it. But the one thing I would suggest is when you are doing it, have your results to hand. It will mean so much more when you're able to refer back to your own results and your own fields. Really puts it into context and will make the training a lot more useful. How do you get the training? Basically, go on to the web and do www.cafre.ac.uk/SNHS-training. And that will bring you to a page within CAFRE, and then you'll be asked to create a new account if you haven't already got an account with us, but I know many have. So simple enough, you can go on, create your new account just by filling in your details, DAERA business number, etc. And once you've that done, then you can log in using your DAERA business ID or your email address and password. And once you've logged in, then you will come to a screen like this, and you will be welcome to the training, and you'll immediately see that the training is in 2 phases. Phase 1 is all about interpreting the results that you've got, and then phase 2 is about using those results to better manage your farm nutrients on the farm. And each of the phases then are broken down into bite-sized chunks as such, and you can work your way through them, and each has 6 or 7 there, and the first phase also includes a couple of chunks on carbon. And the second phase then is about understanding nutrient management. And I will just highlight at the end of both phases, but at the end of the 2 phases, you get a certificate, and that's important. Please save it electronically onto your desktop somewhere safe, or print it out and put it into a file somewhere. But it'd be quite important to have a copy of that going forward. So that's just basically, once you're in, to it. The online training is simple videos. You can go up there, hit the phase 1. It'll give you a brief explanation of the soil nutrient health scheme and the different zones. Then you move in and we'll just highlight the first one here, which is the importance of soil analysis. You look at a video and brings it up, tells you what you're going to learn. And then you will see a colleague of my own out at one of the fields at Greenmount taking samples, and I'll explain through why he's doing that, how he's doing that. And then there is a quiz, and it's as simple as that. It's pretty interactive. You go through the quiz then and answer a few questions. And that's basically it. That's the online training, and you just take your time and work through it. So nearing the end, John, just in a way to summarise, the participation in the soil nutrient health scheme will be a requirement to receive payments going forward, and the conditionality of that will require you to do the training. So, I would encourage you can go on now, do the training, and get ahead of the game where you've got your results. And even if you've soil analysed on your own account, please go ahead, use the training. It's not restricted in any way. So that's pretty much me coming to an end, John. Just like to thank everybody. And look, there's a couple of QR codes there in terms of one linking directly to the training and one to the any frequently asked questions. And I will say, John did mention at the start just about where the department is considering going. And I can say we are considering beyond 2026. And we're currently looking at linkages between soil testing and action plans, etc. So basically watch this space. There will hopefully be developments going forward on how we can use all this information that we've gathered. Thank you very much.
Okay, Stephen, thank you. That's very informative. And I suppose I'll just, before I go on to the next speaker, I'll just remind you all to put your questions in through the Q&A button on your device. Some of you may well have undertaken some of that training, or you may be about to undertake it. If you have any questions or any comments, I'm sure Stephen will very much welcome those, and we'll feed those through the Q&A. Okay, our final speaker then for this evening is Johnny Rice. Johnny is the production manager at Kilwaughter Minerals. Over the last number of years, Kilwaughter have been committed to providing education information around soil health, demonstrating a vital role that calcium plays in the soil and how a little and often approach to liming can provide significant long-term benefits. As a member of the Agricultural Lime Association and more recently a corporate member of the UFU, Kilwaughter are keen to address common misconceptions around liming and to share the importance of both quality and quantity of lime, specifically in response to your soil results. So, Johnny, very glad to have you here. Very glad to have a local company at the forefront of this very important issue. And I'll hand over to you. And like I say, anybody who has any questions, put them in the chat, because as soon as Johnny finishes, I'll put them in the Q&A. As soon as Johnny finishes, we will be going straight to the questions. Okay, thanks, and over to you, Johnny.
Yes, good evening, folks. It's lovely to be with you, and it is a real privilege to follow Mark and Stephen on the webinar tonight. I'm sure you've appreciated their time, and I know we've all learned a lot from them already. I want to thank John and the UFU for the opportunity here and for hosting us this evening as well. So I'm going to share briefly, and it will be brief, on the value of liming. Lime is often considered a logical response to underperforming soils. Mark talked about underperforming soils, and for good reason. But as has already been shared, and I hope you've kind of got this through what's been shared through, particularly what Mark brought to us, it's not the be-all and end-all of the story. Many factors play into the health of your soil. We know, for example, the importance of drainage and compaction, the need to address nutrient deficiencies. We understand a little bit about soil acidity. If your pH is too low, the nutrients won't get released. But what a lot of people do when their soil is underperforming is jump straight to the tweaks, the fine-tuning, applying maybe various different miracle sprays or biostimulants instead of taking the time to fix the things that genuinely make a significant difference. because whichever of the big three is underperforming, whether that's drainage, nutrients, soil acidity, that's where you're going to be losing your yield. You can see in the barrel there on the left of the screen, those staves or planks or whatever makes up a barrel, they're all at different heights. And your barrel will only ever fill up to the height of the lowest stave. That's where you'll lose all of your water. And in the same way, your crop will only ever fill up to the level of the lowest performing soil factor. And if that's pH, then your yield will never reach its full potential. So it matters. But why pH? Why do we make such a big deal about the pH? Well, this chart shows the effectiveness of various nutrients in your soil at different pH levels. And the thing that stands out, and Mark quoted some of these numbers earlier, the thing that stands out is that even at a pH of 6, 11% of nitrogen and a massive 48% of the phosphate stays locked in the soil. Never reaches the plant, never gets through to the roots. You drop that down even further to 5.5, and 23% of nitrogen, 23% of potassium, and 52% of the phosphorus stays locked in the soil, never reaching the plant. Now, in real terms, what 100-pound bag of 2744 and apply it to the ground at a pH of 6, you would lose 80 pounds every time. Now, that's bad enough with one bag. But say you're spending £20,000 a year. That's £4,000 down the drain. Now, if you'd taken that money and invested it in a lime program, you'd already be better off. Higher yield, less fertilizer, stronger crop. And you could repeat that year after year after year. Now, that's at 6. At 5, it's more likely to be 50%. The driver may as well drop half your bags into the ditch on the way to you. pH has a huge impact on the health of your soil. So how does it work? And more importantly, how do we fix it? Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this chart. It'll maybe be a bit too much for some, but I think some will enjoy maybe understand a little bit more about the technical aspect. What happens in acidic soil is a buildup of excess hydrogen. It happens naturally through rainfall, fertilizer application, slurry application, whatever. But your soil is constantly acidifying. And what these hydrogen ions do, these red ones on the left-hand side, is they push nutrients away from the plant. And the way to correct that is through lime. And I'm going to say specifically calcium lime. You see, the lime, or the calcium carbonate, to give it its proper title, draws hydrogen away from the base of the plant. That's what makes the nutrients available. Now, that's a very, very top level, very basic summary, and there's so much else going on, as Mark has already explained and alluded to. But that's effectively what's happening. And the results are genuinely impressive. Now, don't get me wrong, soil chemistry is complicated, far more complicated than I can fully understand it. But if you've genuinely improved drainage, minimized compaction, corrected major nutrient imbalances, and the one thing left is pH, you'll see results. This chart on the right is from the Rothamsted group, who run various long-term research trials. They've got an ongoing one, which they occasionally release the results for, that takes an unlimed field, a field limed up to a pH of 6, and a field limed up to a pH of 7. And they compare the results. Now, we're talking like for like. We're talking same crop, same soil, same fertilizer, everything. And what you see is a 17 to 25% yield increase when lime is applied. And we've heard reports from customers of increases of up to 50% in 1 year. Folks, lime works. And yet so often we see it as a luxury, an occasional, optional, maybe 5-year hit. But it's not. Lime is an essential component, more so even than fertilizer. Plenty of good farming can be done without fertilizer, but if you're not using lime, you're fighting a losing battle. But then the question becomes, well, which lime? How do I know which lime to buy? How much of it do I apply? And how often do I need to apply it? And this is where most of the misunderstanding about lime comes from. All lime is not the same. Depending on where you get it, depending on the quality, the size, the chemical makeup, you could get a very, very different outcome. These are probably the 4 main types of lime bought in Northern Ireland. Most common is screened lime, that second one down. And a screened lime is made up of about 20% small powder particles and around 70 to 80% of a coarser product, like a limestone sand, basically. And that's fairly typical for ground limestone. And the reason that matters is because smaller particles react more than larger particles. They have a higher impact on pH and they get into your soil much, much faster. So the more small particles you have, the faster you'll be able to correct your pH and the sooner you'll get a return on your yield. So the quality matters. And that should also affect how you think about the cost of lime. Many people dismiss granulated lime, for example, because they think it's too expensive. But as you can see from the bottom chart, it's more expensive because it has a much higher concentration, a much higher percentage of the smaller, more effective particles. And because it has a higher percentage of the smaller particles, even though it's granulated, you don't need anywhere near as much of it. Say you had a pH of 5.8 and you knew you needed to get up closer to 6.3, 6.5 to avoid wasting so much fertilizer, or even just to unlock what's already there. Mark's talked about unlocking things that are already in your soil. Now, you could use a standard ground limestone, 2 tons to the acre across the farm, and that's grand. Some of the particles would react quickly, others would take 6 months, some maybe a year and a half. But at 2 tons to the acre, you would probably get your pH up to roughly 6.1, 6.2, and that's not bad. The problem is, because of the rain and the slurry and the fertilizer and just general farm activity, that pH will only stay at that level for at most another 18 months before starting to drop. So by the time you get to year 5 and start thinking about lime again, you're pretty much back where you started. And that's the way most people do it. 2 tons to the acre at a cost of, let's say, £45 a ton for the decent stuff every 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it is. Now, interestingly, to achieve the same increase using granulated lime, you only need about 250 kilograms to the acre, not 2 tons. And that's at most. And because it's made up of almost all the fine stuff, that's going to react straight away. Now, granulated lime could set you back over £150 a ton. That ton will do 4 acres. 2 ton will do 8 acres. And suddenly the maths starts to make a little bit more sense. And then once you've corrected your pH, and you may need to apply the same amount the second year to get it all the way up to where you need it. But once you've corrected it, you only need 80 to 100 kilogram per acre to maintain it. Now, that depends on the type of your soil. A heavier soil is going to need more, a lighter soil is going to need a bit less. If you do that, 2 ton to the acre, or 2 ton is now doing potentially up to 25 acres of farmland. And your pH never drops below the level you need it. That basically starts paying for itself. Your yield performs year after year, and your soil maintains a high nutrient use efficiency every single year. Lime doesn't need to be, nor should it be, a luxury item every 5 years. Small amounts of lime applied every year, and you never need to look back. We do it with fertilizer. Some boys wouldn't dream of skipping a year's fertilizer. So why wouldn't we do it with lime? But you've got to fix it first. That's why your soil test is so important, because it's telling you that if your pH is low, then you've got to fix that first. And folks, there will always be a place for ground limestone. Good quality ground limestone. If you're below 5.7, there's no point in trying to maintain that with granulated lime. Get the ground lime on it now. Do it again another few years. And I would say no more than 3 years. And test it. You see, when you start getting up around 5.8, 6.1, that kind of level, save yourself the hassle. Save yourself the pain. Save your soil from having to go through all the peaks and troughs of pH. and use a granulated lime little and often. There's plenty of guys out there that do exactly that. Plenty of merchants out there selling it. You can sow it yourself. You can sow it in pretty much any weather. You can sow it at pretty much any time. And within a few short months, you'll see the benefit. And folks, every year, you'll be surprised at how such a small change in your farm can make such a significant impact. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate the time. And I've left a few brief summary points up on the screen there. I'm not going to go through them, but I'll leave them on the screen just for a little minute. If you want to even take a photo of some of those points, that just sort of help to explain maybe something that was shared. And obviously, I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Johnny, and also thanks to Stephen and to Mark. We're now going to have the question and answer session. The questions will be directed through the chat, and I'll ask them to the speakers. Sometimes if the question is to a particular speaker, we'll ask it to that one individually, or if anybody else wishes to comment, we'll also have that opportunity. So I'm just going to go into the chat and see what questions we have. So okay, I have a question here for Mark. Wants to know, how can I deal with land that has high potash?
High potash. Stop spreading slurry on it for starters, because a lot of the potassiums are going to be coming from the slurry. But one of the main ways of doing it is actually taking cuts of silage, even if it's on the grazing platform. It pays to shut it up and ultimately take cuts of grass off it. There is this misconception that sowing a crop of wheat is going to remove an awful lot of potassium. Grass moves way more than anything else. 3 cuts of grass will move 300 kilos per hectare of potassium.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And a question here for Stephen. Stephen, someone wants to know, you were talking about your training and the fact that the preference for it to be online, but they want to know, for someone who has difficulty with computers and internet access, how can they undertake the training, and how will I know when I have to do the training? Okay.
Well, in terms of access, you can go to the local DAERA office and they will help you to register on and basically access the training. And if you really want, you could stay all day there and probably sit in a wee cubicle and go through it. Now, that's maybe not everybody's ideal scenario, but it's available. What we are also going to offer this coming probably October, November, December, maybe into January, is some face-to-face sessions. These will be fairly different to the normal small groups. These will be large theatre style events, hopefully taking place in theatres, where you will be able to see and view the videos. And we'll have a local organisation managing that for us, and probably the likes of the union and agricultural consultants will be able to, signpost people to that, John. So there is that option for anybody who would be maybe struggling to get internet access or that. In terms of timing, look, folks, I would actually, if you can, the sooner rather than later. There's no barriers on the training. Even if you haven't got results through the scheme, but you have your own results, please feel free to go online and do the training.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, we're quite keen that that members who don't have that, or maybe aren't as computer literate as others, still get that opportunity, and we're glad that there is going to be some face-to-face training provided. This is probably for you, maybe again, Stephen. It's asking the question: if you change Conacre, how can you get the results? Or if the new land has not been covered in Area 1, covered in previous years, can this be tested? So, yeah, somebody maybe didn't test the field, can they go back to it, I suppose, in a subsequent year?
My understanding is, yes. We still have a few people in Zone 1 and Zone 2 who have registered this year. they maybe weren't at home whenever, they were maybe working away, etc., or missed it. So yes, you can still register and get fields done. The results should be sitting on the system. So if you basically go in and put the field in that you've now taken over as Conacre this year, but last year it was tested, you should get the results through the online service and be able to view them. That was the plan anyway, John. So the results should be sitting there. Look, depends what relationship you have with, I suppose, the person who had it before you. They might furnish you with them too.
Okay, a question here, I think for you, Johnny. It wants to know, although Mark, you might have a comment on this as well. Wants to know when is the best time of year to apply granulated lime. I'll maybe go to Johnny first, and then Mark, maybe ask you for a comment as well.
Well, actually, probably Mark will give probably a more holistic approach to it. So I'd probably defer to Mark on this one. He'll give a wider answer here, which would be more helpful to folk, I think.
I think you could have, Johnny. I mean, generally, I would apply it in the spring in terms of maintenance for granular lime. But if you're reseeding in the autumn, particularly grass reseeds, and you know that it needs it, well, apply it in the autumn. But maintenance-wise, it would be, as Johnny was talking about, the 80 to 100 kilos per acre on an annual basis. I would be doing that in the spring.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, in the first presentation, that was yours, Mark. You would suggest NI needs a lot of lime regularly. And the question is, will DAERA, and I suppose, well, maybe this is to Stephen then, will DAERA consider a financial support scheme to promote lime application, as this would make a significant difference to NI soil health? Do you want to comment on whether they should, and then we'll ask Stephen to comment whether they will? You want to go first, Mark?
I mean, I think people are harking back to 39 to 76 grant scheme, but whether they should, I think you've just got to use lime, irrespective of whether you get a grant or not. You cannot afford to buy fertilizer. If I was a regulator, I wouldn't be allowing people to put fertilizer on fields with a pH of under 6. Put it that way.
Okay.
And if I could add as well, just a comment to say that I think during that period where the subsidies did exist, I think it really, in people's minds, devalued lime.
Yeah.
I think people didn't realize how important it was because they just got it. And I think to encourage folk to see that there's certainly, maybe it's just a biased perspective, but I'd say there's certainly more value in liming than doing a lot of things that we do in the farmland. And so if we can encourage people to see the value of it, rather than having to deal with them and try and give them incentives to use it, I think that would be where the big win would be, really.
Okay, thanks, guys. Question here again for you, Johnny, is asking, why are the recommended pH levels so much lower in NI than in ROI?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. Stephen and I have had this conversation a little bit about sort of pH levels and recommendations. We would certainly say, and Mark, you saw sort of coming up in his presentation, a sort of, particularly because of the phosphorus, really, I think, but various other benefits as well in terms of just that sort of sweet spot for all the nutrients. We would be saying you want to be pushing up to 6.3, 6.5, a little bit higher, I think, for the arable side of things. I think 6 has become the sort of mindset of that's where we need to get to. I would certainly argue from I suppose from a soil chemistry perspective, and Mark would see that story even going a lot wider than that. You want to be going a lot higher than that. And I think probably in the south through Chagas, they have recommended a higher number. So maybe that's maybe one for Stephen, but Stephen and I have had this conversation. I think we would agree that probably does need to be just that little bit beyond. I don't know, Stephen, is that fair?
Yeah, and probably through my career, we started off and pH was 5.5 when we tried to get it to 6. Now I think everybody's talking definitely well above 6, but there is guidance there. There's the current advice in terms of you know, the books and the guidance. And I think most people realise that there's evidence there that you're better to push it a wee bit higher now. But again, I think an interesting thing from Mark's talk is, you know, pH is a combination of things. So, you know, there's calcium's a key bit, but, you know, magnesium and other bits and pieces in there. And, you know, like we've heard of people putting on the wrong type of lime at times, you know, too much magnesium creating problems. So it is important, no matter what, you know, what pH you're going for, just look at what else is happening in the soils.
Just when you're on magnesium, there is a question here asking, and this I think is directed towards Mark, I think, how can I reduce magnesium from grassland?
Well, magnesium comes on in many sources. You know, you've got some quite high magnesium limestone in you know, in Northern Ireland, so that's one source. There's an awful lot of magnesium that goes into minerals. There's an awful lot of magnesium that goes into feed at certain times of year. People are dusting magnesium onto the fields. People are also putting it into the water. So you've got to be aware of what was happening. You also had magnesium limestone in the CAN that you were all using until a few years ago, which Yara were putting on as well. So in terms of reducing, work out what your sources are, but it's not just about high magnesium. As I was trying to allude to earlier on, make sure that you know what the calcium level is of the land as well. You know, understand the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium balances, because it, you know, magnesium, okay, if it's 600 parts per million, yes, it's high. But if it's 200 parts per million, it's not especially high. So you need to understand these figures. One way of solving magnesium issues is using sulfate fertilizers, particularly calcium sulfate fertilizers, because that chemically engineers the magnesium out of the soil. It might require quite high rates initially, but I've halved magnesium rates from 800 down to 400 by the use of calcium sulfate. So there is ways of doing it. But you need to have proper soil tests and maybe more in detailed soil tests.
Okay.
Can I just make a little comment just very quickly on that one? The calcium sulfate story it is a very interesting one, but I think one of our concerns sometimes is, I think Mark indicated this, people applying that when their pH isn't high enough to sustain it. And that would certainly be a concern that we would, I think if you're about a sort of 6.87 sort of direction, and it makes perfect sense. Guys that are at 5.8, 5.96 applying it and not doing themselves any favors.
It's the wrong material, which is why you've got to have the right soil test. Because if the base saturation of calcium is below 60% and you're applying calcium sulfate, you're going to do much more damage. You're not going to strip the magnesium out at that level.
Okay, question for Stephen here with regard to the online training. Stephen, if you're doing that, the question is, can you, if you've done it and you want to go back again, can you go back and start from the beginning, or view a bit that you viewed previously? It's not like you view it in sequence. You can sort of jump in and out at different stages, or is it just you have to watch it the once and that's it?
No, you can go in and it will basically, you know, save where you've got to, and then the next time you go in, you can go through and join at that place again. So no, it's very flexible in that, and the platform that we use, everybody is still able to access it at the moment. Now there may be a period of time after 3 or 4 years it may cut off, but look, it's all up and running now, so there's no issues.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We're running sort of quite close to our finish time, so maybe a couple of quick questions and quick answers. Johnny, for you, does lime affect clover growth?
So, I mean, again, Mark can add a little bit. My understanding is yes, and it can do in a positive sense, and sort of some of the knock-on effects, and that I think the potential is that if you're using lime and it's right to use lime, you could be pushing your available nitrogen higher, which would then have a positive knock-on effect on the clover. And I think in terms of just sort of general anecdotal, and maybe not, again, Mark can clarify this a little bit, you would tend to get, once you push your pH higher, you tend to get less of a weed issue. So you'll be having your better grass getting an opportunity to grow, and therefore you'll need to spray less, and that would obviously be quite damaging to the clover. So I think you're creating a better environment, certainly, which allows the clover to thrive. But maybe there's a more technical aspect to it, Mark, that would be helpful.
I think one of the key things with establishing clover and maintaining clover is a good pH. It doesn't like low pHs, but also clover loves calcium. So actually having that calcium supply there is vitally important.
Okay. It was quite obvious to me going through the presentations. I mean, like, this is, and I think somebody said it. No, soil chemistry is complicated. No, this is not straightforward. It's not simple, and quite often the simpler and much easier thing to do is just to go and buy the compound fertilizer and spread it. But we're realizing that that's something is not going to be as straightforward as it was in previous years going forward, and there's lots of reasons for that. And also there's an economic impact. I suppose one question here which relates a bit to that, Mark, in terms of and I suppose this is going into that chemistry element, but why should I be concerned about calcium levels if the pH is okay? So pH is reading good on the test. So why would you still want to apply more calcium?
Well, as highlighted in a couple of my slides there, when you do the more detailed soil test, you can in some instances see that the calcium is low. pH might be at 6.2, 6.3, but it might be driven by potassium and magnesium. So what you're actually trying to do by rebalancing with calcium is literally rebalance that soil and get an appropriate balance of calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium as the base cations. So it is having the knowledge there and making sure that you use the correct figures like CEC and calcium amount, magnesium amount. So that one instance where I quoted was 52% calcium when I wanted 65. It was a long way short, and even some of the Northern Irish ones, you could see that it was well short. So it's that holistic approach that, yes, it's slightly more complicated, but once you get to grips with it, you start to understand where you need to focus, and you're getting more bang for your buck, and you're getting more crunch in your grass. You're getting more, you're getting stiffer straw. You're getting more upright legumes, etc. So there is a rigidity to everything because that biomass is improved with the calcium. So don't ignore calcium.
Okay, and the final question, at least it's the final question I have because we are sort of over our time a little bit. Just a simple enough question: is lime organic?
You would certainly the lime that we sell. I mean, yes, I guess. And our lime is approved by the Scottish Organic Producers Association, which I think is the only body in the UK that is sort of certifies organic products in that sense. So yes is the answer to that. It's bound using an organic material as well. So yeah.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have. We ran a little bit over time, so apologies for that, but I think the questions were worth getting answers for, so that's why we just wanted to continue on. I'd just like to thank Mark, Stephen and Johnny for their time this evening and their insight and the information they provided to us. It is complicated. It is something that will take us all time to compute internally ourselves and how we go through it. But what's encouraging is the high level of uptake that we have seen in terms of getting the soil analysis done and the high level of uptake going towards taking the training as well. And I think it all augurs well for the future of the industry and the future for our farming industry here in Northern Ireland, that we have this baseline and we can use this and use information that's been made available to us. I'd like to thank all the participants for joining us this evening. Thank you for your time as well. I hope you've learned something from it. I would invite you to fill in the survey at the end, because we're happy to take any criticism so we can improve events for the future. And once again, I'd like to thank you all and have a rest of a pleasant evening. So good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah.